So you already have your first goats, and now you're thinking that you want to breed them. That's what dairy goats are all about. The way we get lactations going is by breeding our goats. So your first question is going to be, well, when should I breed them? When is the right time? For how old do they need to be? What size should they be? How often? What does it take? How do I know when they're ready to be bred? So the first thing to know is if you're working with a doe who's young and you're saying, when is she going to be old enough? The answer for mini breeds like Nigerians is typically 40 pounds or 7 months old. I personally prefer that they be both. I've had some 7-month-olds who are really undersized and just needed more time. So even though technically they were old enough to breed, I like to let them gain a little bit more size. They do not need to be full size when they get pregnant for the first time. They will still continue to grow during their pregnancy. For a standard size doe, the rule of thumb is 8 months or 80 pounds. Again, use your best judgment if you feel like it's the right time. So a gestation lasts for 5 months. In the mini breeds, that's 145 days. And in the full-size breeds, full term is considered 150 days. So something else to consider when you're breeding your goats is what's happening in your life 5 months from then. Make sure that you don't have a family vacation planned, a work trip planned. You need to plan to be home when those babies are born. A lot of people strategize around, or at least try to make it so their kids are going to be born during spring break, so the family's home, especially if you have kids in 4-H who definitely want to be a part of it, part of the action. So plan your breedings around your life and your lifestyle. So in terms of when the exact time is to breed your goats, some are year-round breeders and some are seasonal breeders. So some seasonal breeds, a lot of the larger sized dairy goats are seasonal breeds, will only come into heat in the fall. They will cycle every 17 to 22 days. They're pretty predictable. Often, if you start writing it down on a calendar, you'll see your does are actually pretty regular. But Nigerians can technically be bred any month of the year, though at certain times of the year the hormones will really fly, like right now here in late summer, early fall. Then for us, I won't see a heat in May, June. It'll be silent. I won't know that the does are actually in heat, even though they are cycling. I am just not seeing it. One skill you'll need to learn, especially if you don't keep bucks on site, is how to spot your doe's heat cycle. They all have different cues and some are more obvious than others. I will be doing a separate video on this topic. There are some little secrets. It can be challenging to figure that out at first, but you will get better at it the more trained your eyes are to spotting a heat cycle. So what are your options for breeding? There are 3 ways, essentially, that a doe can get pregnant. The first is called live cover. This means actual interaction with a live living male in person. This is very high success rate. That's by far the fastest and easiest way to get your doe pregnant is with live cover. The boys are really good at their jobs. The other way is through AI, which is artificial insemination. This is using semen from a straw inserted into your doe at exactly the right moment in her heat cycle. This would need to be done by a veterinarian or a real professional goat keeper who has all the tools. It really has to be timed and temperature just right. And this only has about a 30% success rate. It's fun when you get into the world of artificial insemination because you could use bucks that are dead, that are from across the country. But if you're just starting out, just keep that in the back of your mind as maybe something for the future. It's a bit more advanced. There is also something called embryo transfer, but since we're working on basic breeding, that might be a more advanced topic for another day. So if live cover is the right choice for you, you're going to need the man. You're going to need a buck. So there are different possibilities for bucks, and I'm going to go through each of those and also the pros and cons of each, because there are definitely pros and cons to each. So the first option would be to buy a buck. If you buy a buck, there are a lot of pros. He'll be here exactly the moment you need him. He will alert you. He and your does will alert you to when they're in heat. It can become a lot easier to spot heat cycles when you have a buck on site. He'll be eager and willing to do the job, and his success rate, because he'll be kind of comfortable and relaxed at home, and your doe will be comfortable and relaxed at home. The breeding will probably happen pretty easily. Hopefully she gets pregnant on the first try. But of course there are some cons with that. Now you're feeding a buck all year round that you only need for, a few minutes at a time per breeding. And if you only have a couple of does, that's a long time to be feeding a guy whose job is over pretty fast. They also stink like heck. Once you have a buck on site and he is what's called in rut, which means in season himself, this is what happens in the fall, they pee all over themselves to give themselves this lovely perfume for the does. And every time I go in and handle my bucks right now, I have to go burn those clothes and take a shower. And last thing you want to do is invite friends over when you've been handling the bucks. So your next option for using a buck would be to lease a buck. So this means you find someone else who lives in your area who would be willing to let you lease their buck and actually bring that buck onto your property for a period of time. This has the same pros as buying a buck in the sense that the guy's here, he'll be ready to go. You won't have to drive when your doe's in heat. He'll just be right there. He'll help you identify when your does are in heat, and you don't have to feed him all year round. The cons for that are biosecurity. We need to make sure that that guy is disease-free and that he's not bringing both parasites from his previous farm, his other farm, and diseases to your farm and to your does. So that's definitely something to consider. The other is that you are taking on the liability of someone else's animals. Anything can happen. We've had rogue dogs just show up on our property out of nowhere. Thankfully, we've not lost any goats to that, but things happen. Goats can get pneumonia. Goats can, get killed by a cougar. Goats, you just never know what's going to happen. So be really clear and have a contract with someone if you do decide to do a lease to both protect you and them. It's a little bit cool and also a little bit scary to lease somebody else's buck. A more common option I see with people who are just starting to breed and don't own their own bucks yet is to do what's called a driveway breeding. So this means that when your doe is in what's called a full standing heat, meaning she's like ready to go, you drive over to the owner of the buck's house and literally pull her out of your car. They go get the buck out of his pen and breed them in the driveway. So the idea there is that we're having less biosecurity risk in terms of we're not actually stepping hoof in someone else's pasture and vice versa. There, of course, still are potential biosecurity concerns for diseases just from even that small amount of contact. So you would need to make sure that your herd is clean and their herd is clean. And the beauty is, you don't have to own the buck. The cons are you have to find someone near you who's willing to do this, who's available basically at the drop of a hat, because you're not sure when your doe is going to come into heat. And when you need to kind of just get her in the car and go. So you need to have someone who's easy to work with, flexible, that you can contact and reach out to you. But this does usually have a pretty good rate of conception. And it's a good opportunity if you can find that local person who's willing to let you driveway breed. I will tell you, my first year I did driveway breedings with someone who was an acquaintance then and is now a good friend. And I brought my does out. I had 4 does to breed 8 times, and her house was an hour away from me each direction. Because the first time 3 didn't settle. So it took several tries. I would bring them to breed, would think that they got pregnant, and then 21 days later they'd be back in heat, and I got back in the car and drove them over there again. So that's kind of the pros and cons with driveway breeding. Selecting your buck. This is actually probably the most important thing. I know you're thinking to yourself, oh, I just want to get my does bred. It doesn't really matter. It does matter. It really does matter because eventually those kids are going to grow up, and if you end up getting doelings that you keep as milkers or even you sell to be future milkers. you do not want to be passing forward something crummy or something that's hard to work with or something that's disease prone. And I know we all think like, oh, he's cute, it doesn't matter. It really does. It really does matter which buck you pick. So a couple things to know if you're buying a buck, leasing a buck, or driveway breeding. The first thing to do is not to look at pictures of a cute guy and say, oh, he's got such splashy colors. Okay, that doesn't make a great goat. It doesn't. Listen to me now. It doesn't make a great goat. The first things I would do is, number one, we want a clean tested animal who is disease free. The second thing I would do really would be to go and look at pictures of his dam's udder, or maybe the owner has the dam. I don't want to breed any of my does to any buck who's out of a subpar mom. His mom should have had really well attached udder, great production, really lovely teat placement, because these are milking animals. This is, at the end of the day, we do not want to be trying to milk udders where the teats are way out on the side or the attachments are not good so the udder is swinging around. I would really want to see pictures of the dam's udder. And through the beauty of Google, you can look up other relatives too. I definitely would do a lot of stalking of the relatives of this buck. And if this buck is older and has children who've already, been bred before and have udders, I would poke around and see if I can find some pictures to see what his offspring look like. The other thing to think about is how old this buck is that you're going to get. If you buy a baby buckling, keep in mind that he's not going to be ready for a while to breed your does. If you're looking for someone, let's say it's July, June, and you're looking for someone to breed your does in October, September, baby buckling is not going to be a good choice. You're going to want to start with an older buck. After about 7 months old, they're pretty tall and pretty good to go for the most part. At least that's been my experience with the Nigerians. But do keep that in consideration if you're looking to breed this year. Well, those are some breeding basics. Breeding season is actually my favorite time of year. It's full of optimism and hope about these future babies you're going to meet next year and all the possibilities that are out there. The does are usually pretty happy. The bucks are really happy when they finally get to go play with those does. So have fun. Best of luck. Post any questions in the comments.